Merrick Garland is up on Capitol Hill, the Attorney General, who has presided over some very political and dubious decisions during his 2 years in this role. It's worth noting Merrick Garland was, we were told in the latter half of the Obama years, he was the totally reliable, nonpartisan judge who should be on the Supreme Court. And Republicans, to Mitch McConnell's credit, which I know is a phrase that gets groans from this audience, but Mitch McConnell, good on judges. He's good on judges. He can be bad on a lot of other things, and I get it, but he's good on judges. And I think anybody would have a hard time on the right arguing against that. Remember, they held that. They didn't go forward with the vote. Merrick Garland didn't get his Supreme Court seat, and I think he's bitter. Today, Ted Cruz, who knows all this legal stuff backwards and forwards, had the opportunity to question Merrick Garland in front of the Senate committee, Senate Judiciary. And they were talking to Merrick Garland about a few issues. And the one that really got Ted Cruz fired up, something we talked about, Clay, with some detail on the show, was, we remember there was a leak. So we're all on the same page here. There was a leak of a Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade months before the actual official printing of the decision. And so this was done. We never found out who the leaker is, by the way. We may never find the real leaker.
We were actually told it was impossible to find out by the Supreme Court masters or whatever their titles were who conducted this investigation internally at the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So that strikes me as they just don't want to deal with the ramifications of a lib justices, because we know it came from a lib justices team putting this out there. But anyway, as we know, then there were these protests that also coincided with someone showing up with, a knife and a gun on his person, saying he wanted to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. So a lunatic, yes, but lunatics assassinate, look at who has assassinated, U.S. presidents in the past. Crazy people do things like that. That can happen. And so this maniac shows up, says he wants to kill Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. He is arrested by the U.S. Marshals. It was a very tense time. It was an effort by the Democrat left to subvert the Supreme Court and the judiciary process that we have. And here's the thing. There is actually a statute that very clearly says, and Ted Cruz held it up during this hearing. You can see held up with, in bold, the intent to influence, intent to change the outcome effectively. And harassing, intimidating, none of that. You don't have to just threaten to kill a judge. Just harassing and intimidating a judge is a federal crime. And we know that you don't show up at someone's home as a mob demanding a certain Supreme Court outcome and not fall under the statute. Ted Cruz went after Merrick Garland. Enjoy, everybody. Listen to this one.
But in the wake of the leak of the Dobbs decision, when rioters descended on the homes of 6 Supreme Court justices, night after night after night, you did nothing. The department did nothing. When extremist groups like Ruth Sent Us and Jane's Revenge openly organized campaigns of harassment at the homes of justices, you sat on your hands. When these same groups posted online information about where the justices worship, or their home addresses, or where their kids went to school, you again sat on your hands and did nothing. Your failure to act to protect the safety of the justices and their families was an obvious product of political bias. You agree with Roe versus Wade. You disagree with the Dobbs decision.
And those threats of violence continued there from Ted Cruz, Buck, to the point that you brought up, but we legitimately had a guy fly all the way across the country from California armed with a handgun show up outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house. And this is important to reemphasize because I think it got lost. The reason why the Dobbs leak was so incredibly dangerous is until an opinion is published, it isn't the law of the land. Whoever leaked the Dobbs decision was implicitly encouraging violence to be acted out against any of the 5 justices in the majority. And this is why I think Justice John Roberts was such a coward for not adding his own name to this decision and making a 6-3 decision, because unfortunately, that death threat and the consequences of what a death might mean hangs over the court now with a 5-4 decision. And in particular, Buck, the Washington, D.C. legal community is small. The legal community in general for high-level circuit court judges is very small. Everybody knows everybody. Merrick Garland refusing to protect the Supreme Court justices as he is obligated to do under federal law, and also, frankly, state law not being enforced for those judges who live in Virginia or Maryland, is one of the most indefensible things I've ever seen occur in this country as it pertains to the Supreme Court. Because you can agree or disagree with the decisions that the justices make, and we're going to agree and disagree with their decisions, as I just did with John Roberts' decision not making it 6-3, for our entire lives. That's what being a judge is. You look at all the facts, sometimes we come to different conclusions. The idea that you wouldn't protect the justices and their families to the utmost of the law is, frankly, indefensible. And Merrick Garland should be ashamed of himself for many things, but this is at the very top of the list, in my opinion.
I think we all understand what happened here. First of all, Ted Cruz gets at it when he says that this is because Merrick Garland, I'm sure, deeply agrees with the, now we can say with even more force, absurd Roe v. Wade decision. And it's actually absurd regardless of what one thinks of abortion. I mean, just as a legal matter, as we've discussed on the show before, Roe v. Wade is just garbage. It's, I want this thing, so I'm going to make believe that it's in the Constitution. It is as much of a subversion of the Constitution as you could find, really. The imagining of a right that isn't there. Okay, but put that aside for just a moment. Why did he not want to do anything? In addition to that, it's because U.S. Marshals arresting Democrat activist protesters at that moment in time would have been a bad look. Biden administration would have had to say, yes, we do believe in enforcing the law. Sorry, lunatic abortion-loving protesters, you actually don't get to intimidate this justice. You don't get to abide by a different set of rules. Because when it comes to abortion, there has always been for Democrats a different set of rules. Because Ted Cruz also went after Merrick Garland on the difference in how he approaches prosecuting people that are in the pro-life movement. The guy that allegedly shoved the person. Remember that? They showed up and arrested him. FBI arrested him at his house. He's facing 10 years in prison for a shove because it involved abortion access, versus abortion extremists who go around, firebombing places and writing threats in graffiti on the walls. Merrick Garland has chosen sides in this and done so in flagrant violation of existing federal statute. And Ted Cruz, not letting him get away with it today.
Yeah, and again, I think we have to tie this in with the Washington Post story that came out early this morning. Merrick Garland is testifying, and what Merrick Garland would like to believe in his own head is that he is a paragon of virtue. He is a man of the law. He does not exercise great. He is not a biased sort of Supreme Court of Attorney General, right? That's all going up in smoke. And we said this back in August when the Mar-a-Lago raid happened. But when the FBI is coming out and letting it be known that high-level FBI officials who were involved in this investigation were not only disagreeing with it, having yelling arguments with the Department of Justice over whether they should raid Mar-a-Lago, this all comes back on the feet of Merrick Garland. And his hypocritical, inconsistent, without precedent behavior is currently being attacked, justifiably so, as he sits in front of the Senate. And there are many things you can point to, but I would say the failure to protect the Supreme Court justices and the Mar-a-Lago raid are two stories that will live in infamy for Merrick Garland's tenure. And Buck, imagine what would have happened. I said this on the radio show. I hated to even think about it. But what if that loon that tried to kill Brett Kavanaugh had actually assassinated Brett Kavanaugh. I don't think that people have even thought through. Sometimes you need to go down the world of alternate history to think about the situations that you have created with your behavior. If Kavanaugh gets assassinated by that guy, Dobbs does not become the rule of the law of the land because there's only 8 justices. And then Joe Biden gets to replace Brett Kavanaugh with a new Supreme Court justice. You want to talk about the country coming undone? Joe Biden would be rewarded with a new Supreme Court justice appointment based on the criminal murder of Brett Kavanaugh by a far left-wing activist, which was spurned on by the leak of the Dobbs decision before it became law. I mean, you talk about civil war and unrest and chaos in the streets. All of that would have been in play had that occurred, and Merrick Garland didn't do everything he could to stop it from happening.
I would just add to that, Clay, because I do think that really hits home for everybody, the gravity of the situation and why there was a need to enforce the law without fear or favor
and why there
of
still
politics
is,
here.
right?
And why there still is. But I would also note, think of the mentality of an employee. It's very small and not a lot of people. A person who works in the Supreme Court day to day was willing to put the lives of conservative justices in jeopardy for a blanket fake constitutional right to kill babies.
Let me just say, Ted Cruz did a great job there. I think that the hypothesis that we just laid out needs to be discussed in public more often because it speaks to the recklessness of Merrick Garland's behavior in not protecting the families, to say nothing of it. Brett Kavanaugh attempted assassination attempt. What if some crazy person kills a kid of one of the justices as they're taking them to school? I mean, these justices should be protected as much as we are protecting high-level government authorities, whether it's the Speaker of the House, President of the United States, head of the Senate, whoever it is. This is shameful, and it deserves to be called such. I hope he's going to get grilled on that story and the Mar-a-Lago raid and the fact that many high-ranking FBI officials did not want to do that raid, making this even more of a political persecution of Donald Trump. But wanted to give you an opportunity to hear A.G. Garland's response. Ted Cruz asked why, given all of the issues with danger, right, the abortion the abortion activists who have attacked pro-life centers all over the country, burned them, literally thrown Molotov cocktails in the windows, defaced them, almost nothing being done at all by the Department of Justice. Here was Merrick Garland's response.
Why do you send 24 agents in body armor to arrest a sidewalk counselor who happens to be pro-life, but you don't devote resources to prosecute people who are violently firebombing crisis pregnancies?
It is a priority of the department to prosecute and investigate and find the people who are doing those firebombings. They are doing it at night and in secret. And we have found one group which we did prosecute.
You found one. How many have there been? How many attacks?
There have been a lot. And if you have any information specifically as to who those people are, we would be glad. We would be glad to have.
I think next he was going to say, did you authorize the sending in of the agents to go arrest the pro-life guy for the like shove situation? Nobody was injured, nobody was hurt, no property destroyed, but someone shoved somebody, and it happened to involve abortion clinic access. So they sent in FBI agents to make the arrest. Got to go in right away. Got to send in the guys with ARs and tac vests.
I don't think this is the job for Merrick Garland, right? I mean, before the when Joe Biden put his cabinet together, if you had told me, we've had these conversations, Buck, if you had told me, hey, who's somebody that you think is just not going to be a disaster, I probably would have said Merrick Garland because he's a judge. And I bought into the idea that he's going to be relatively even-tempered and somewhat normal. And I think you may be right, Buck, about maybe he's just so burned over not getting on the Supreme Court that he is allowing that to wreck all of his judgment because he's been a disaster and an indefensibly bad attorney general.